Today's topic on Critical Insights, Inverter-Based Resources and the NERC Standards. NERC has traditionally focused on large conventional power plants. Why are inverter-based resources like solar, wind, and battery systems now being brought into NERC's compliance scope?
That's a great question. Essentially, it comes down to closing a reliability gap. In recent years, a lot of the solar farms, wind parks, and battery installations have been operating just outside that bulk electric system definition, meaning they weren't required to follow NERC reliability standards. And regulators realize that even these smaller resources can have a material impact on the bulk power grid if something goes wrong. In 2022, I think that's when it was, FERC actually directed NERC to identify and start regulating these previously unregistered inverter-based resources, or IBRs, for that reason. We've seen that as the grid adds more renewables, issues at inverter-based sites like sudden trips during disturbances can ripple through the system. So NERC is bringing these resources into the compliance fold to ensure they meet the same reliability rules as the big generators, which ultimately helps protect the stability of the grid. So in short, the grid is changing and NERC scope is expanding to cover even resources that could materially affect reliability regardless of its size or technology.
What is the threshold for an inverter-based resource to be required to register with a NERC regional entity under these new rules?
Another good question. So NERC has set a clear bright line threshold for when inverter-based resource, again IBR, must register. The rule of thumb is 20 MVA of aggregate capacity at a single point of interconnection at 600 kV or higher voltage. So in simpler terms, if you have a solar farm, wind project, or battery site, or a combination of those at one location, that totals about 20 megawatts or more, and it's hooked to the grid at roughly sub-transmission voltage or above, you'll need to register with NERC. There's no way out of that. So previously, the bulk electric system definition, it only caught plants at 75 MVA or larger at 100 kV plus. So a lot of mid-sized renewables slipped under the radar. This new 20 MVA at 60 kV threshold is designed to capture those mid-size IBRs that could impact the grid, while still excluding some of the very small or distributed resources. So for owners, it means if your facility meets that threshold, you must sign up with your NERC Regional Entity, which is like WEC or MRO or TRE, and comply with the applicable reliability standards. It's a lower bar than before, so reflecting the fact that even modest-sized solar wind plants can matter for reliability now. That's important to note. The reliability of the grid is what we're focused on, and we're reducing the threshold to get into entry to cover those mid-sized resources.
What unique risks do inverter-based resources pose to the bulk electric system that prompted this change?
Yes, so IBRs, they behave a bit differently from traditional power plants, and that introduces some new risks. For one, we've had several arid disturbances where solar and wind farms tripped offline unexpectedly, far more than anticipated. For example, events like the Blue Cut fire in California in 2016 and the Canyon 2 fire in 2017, they caused large sudden losses of solar generation because many inverters shut down during the voltage dips. That's the kind of unplanned drop in output that has us having these reliability concerns. So if you lose hundreds of megawatts in an instance, the rest of the system has to scramble to pick up the slack. Another issue is that these resources, they lack the inertia of a big spinning generator. In a traditional plant, these heavy turbines, they help stabilize the frequency and voltage. They have momentum. Inverters, they don't have that inert stabilizing mass. So the grid can be less resilient to disturbances if we rely heavily on IBRs. They also sometimes don't respond to frequency changes the way a conventional generator would. All this, it just means that without proper settings and standards, a fleet of IBRs might not ride through faults or support the grid during a disturbance. NERC identified these issues, calling them high impact, high likelihood risks. And that's a big driver for bringing IBRs into the standards framework. The goal is to make sure inverter-based resources stay online and help the grid when it's under stress, instead of inadvertently making a bad situation worse. That's why it's important to bring these IBRs into the NERC compliance fold.
In the near term, what requirements will owners and operators of these IBR facilities need to meet, and what impact should they expect?
Well, there are a few immediate things on the horizon. First, you got to register. That registration started mid-2025. Qualifying IBR owners, they're going to be required to register. So with a deadline around mid-2026 for full compliance. So if you meet that 20 MVA 60 kV criteria, you should be preparing now to get into the NERC compliance program. Once you're registered, you'll have to adhere to the applicable NERC reliability standards, just like any traditional generator. That's important to note because that means everything from keeping equipment within voltage and frequency, ride-through settings, to reporting disturbances, to coordinating on grid modeling data, that's all going to come into scope. A significant new area for many is going to be the NERC CIP, or the Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. These are the cybersecurity and physical security rules. Even a solar or wind plant will likely have a control center or a SCADA system that could be deemed a low-impact cyber asset, or even maybe a medium if it manages a lot of generation. Owners, they're going to need to implement these security policies, the training, the electronic perimeter protections, and so on. So to protect these control systems, that's the important part. Operationally, expect an increase in paperwork and process. You'll need to maintain documentation, train staff on compliance, and possibly even invest in some tools or consultants to help manage these obligations. They're a bit burdensome. Essentially, the IBR operators will now face the same scrutiny the big grid players do. So proactive compliance is going to be key to avoid penalties or any type of disruption. The upside is that meeting these requirements, they should make your facility more reliable and resilient. It's a bit of upfront effort, aligning your settings with standards, ensuring your teams know the drill for reporting and the cybersecurity rules, but it should pay off. It's intended to pay off by improving grid stability and keeping you in good standing with the regulators. The advice we're giving industry folks is don't wait. Start assessing your readiness now so you can smoothly hit those 2025, 2026 targets and keep your focus on operating effectively within these new rules. Hi everyone, this is Stacy Bresler. Obviously we've been talking about IBRs today, and that's such a new area for focus in our industry. It's important to get ahead of that, and I know a number of renewables IBRs, they're really struggling with this, and if you're one of them and you need some help, whether you've started your program or you haven't even looked into it, if you need help with registration, give us a call. Archer really is good at this. We've been doing it for a lot of utilities, and we'd like to help you. It's not easy, especially if you've not been in the compliance world before. That's going to be a bit of a culture shock, and we're here to help you go through that journey. Appreciate a phone call, and good luck.
If you need assistance protecting your critical infrastructure, reach out and contact Archer today.